Hello and welcome back to Political Science 100, Nevada Constitution. Today I'll be discussing the executive branch, in particular the various offices that make up the executive branch and the roles of those officials. The executive branch has a similar function as that of the executive branch at the national level. The executive branch exists to implement, to administer, and enforce the laws passed by the legislature. Nevada is unique in that it has a plural executive. A plural executive means that Nevada voters elect 6 separate executive branch officers. We'll be discussing each of those today. However, prior to moving on to that, we'll discuss the qualifications. Now, the framers of the Constitution of Nevada created a plural executive because they feared entrusting too much power in any one individual or in any one branch. They didn't want the governor, in other words, to have too much power alone. With regard to qualifications, all 6 members of the plural executive must be 25 years old. They must have been residents of the state for at least 2 years. And they have to be qualified electors. Again, qualified electors are the same requirements as a registered voter, only you do not have to be registered to vote. So for your purposes, it means that you cannot be a felon. Terms. Each of the members of the plural executive are chosen through partisan elections. They serve for 4-year terms. There are term limits, though, for each of the executive branch officers, meaning they can only serve a certain number of terms. I'll mention this when we go through each of these. Again, the plural executive consists of 6 different offices. These offices include the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, the controller, and the treasurer. With regard to the governor, the powers of the governor are similar to that of the president, though there is at least one notable difference. The governor serves, for example, as chief executive, as commander-in-chief. Each of these roles we'll be discussing in an alternative lecture. Lieutenant governor. The lieutenant governor is the equivalent to the vice president at the national level. And the lieutenant governor does not have much power. The lieutenant governor is second in line to the gubernatorial position. If anything should happen to the governor, then the lieutenant governor would become the acting governor. If there's a vacancy or absence, as the Constitution of the state of Nevada says, then the lieutenant governor will become the acting governor. This became a point of contention at one point in our history because there was a question as to what absent meant. And since the members of the plural executive are selected separately, it can occur that you have a governor from one party and a lieutenant governor from another party, which would create some tension. This has occurred a few times in our history, and in the 60s, this was the case. Grant Sawyer was the then governor, and his lieutenant governor tried to claim that there was an absence of the governor when Sawyer went out of town went out of the state for 5 hours. Eventually, this ended up in the state Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that there must be an effective absence and a critical emergency in order for the lieutenant governor to take on the position of governor. Lieutenant Governor Lonnie Hammergren, also tried to assume the powers of the governor when serving under Governor Bob Miller. Bob Miller was a Democrat, and Lieutenant Governor Hammergren was a Republican. He did not succeed in exercising this authority. The lieutenant governor not only is the second in line to succeed the governor, but they are also the president of the Senate. As president of the Senate, there really is no actual power. All the lieutenant governor is authorized to do is cast a vote when there are ties. But as you're aware, there are 21 members of the Senate, so there are not ties. This therefore limits the lieutenant governor's power in the Senate. Lieutenant governor also notably serves on the Economic Development and Tourism Commissions. These are integral commissions to the development of our economy, since our economy is based largely on tourism. The third office of the plural executive is the Attorney General. The Attorney General is the chief legal advisor of the state. As chief legal advisor, they provide legal advice and guidelines to state agencies through advisory legal opinions. They also defend the state or prosecute cases in both Nevada and the U.S. Supreme Court. Moreover, they oversee all of the Nevada's district attorneys. District attorneys are lead attorneys, prosecutors in the 17 counties. They also submit reports on the state of law enforcement to the governor every 2 years. And finally, serve on the Prison Commission, Board of State Pardons, and the Board of Examiners. The Secretary of State is the fourth member of the plural executive. And the Secretary of State is the chief record keeper. They are the custodian of the state's records. Under Article 5 of the state constitution, the Secretary of State is required to keep a record of all acts of the legislative and executive departments. Moreover, the Secretary of State signs all grants and commissions, stamping them with the state's official seal. They also, for example, issue certificates of incorporation to businesses and serve on the Prison Commission and Board of Examiners. Finally, the Secretary of State is responsible for elections and the recording of elections. For example, they prepare the ballot, publish election results, and issue certificates of election to the winners. If you're ever looking for election information, you can go to the Secretary of State's website and find it there. Finally, the last two offices of the plural executive include the Controller and Treasurer. These individuals serve as custodians of the state funds. And really they serve as two sides of the money coin. The Controller is responsible for issuing warrants to the Treasurer. In other words, telling the Treasurer who to pay and where to give the money. The treasurer is responsible for depositing all of the state's funds, and upon receiving a warrant from the controller, to disperse money. So to simplify, the treasurer collects the money and the controller disperses the money, authorizes the dispersal of the money. Finally, the controller serves as the chief bookkeeper for the state and provides an annual report of expenditures. Together, these 6 offices make up the plural executive. And in a different lecture, you will hear the roles of the governor specifically.